Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Tom Raditz, and we're continuing with a Bible challenge for oneness believers. Chapter 7, Proof Texting Number 2, Before Abraham Was, I Am, from John 8:58. This is video number 8. See below for links to the previous videos. In this video, we will continue in Section 2, examining how oneness proof texts precisely align with the devil's own method of interpretation. Let's get started. Chapter 7. Proof texting number 2, Before Abraham Was, I Am, John 8:58. Here's another verse that people often think can only mean that Jesus was claiming to be Yahweh, the great I Am. However, there are many problems with that interpretation. Here's the verse in John 8:58. Jesus said to them, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am." Again, from a Trinitarian perspective, where does this verse explain, quote, God is a trinity of three co-equal persons in one substance, unquote? It doesn't, right? So Trinitarians, in order to use this as a proof text, which they do, have to jump to conclusions and create their false dilemma. The Trinitarian's false dilemma is, quote, this can only indicate that Jesus is claiming to be the great I Am, and thus he must be one of the members of a trinity of persons in the Godhead, unquote. This is how a Trinitarian would use John 8:58 as a proof text for their Trinity doctrine, which they impose on the text by eisegesis rather than gain from the text by exegesis what it clearly and openly teaches in detail, since this verse doesn't say anything about a trinity of persons or one substance. Again, on the same token, where does this verse explain Jesus is a dual-natured incarnation of the Father, his deity is called Father, and his human flesh is called Son, but he only has one identity, one personality that operates in different modes, unquote? It doesn't, right? So, onenessians, to use this as a proof text, jump to conclusions and create their false dilemma. The onenessians' false dilemma is, quote, this can only indicate that Jesus is claiming to be the great I Am, thus Jesus is God the Father incarnate, unquote. This is how a onessian would use John 8:58 as a proof text for their oneness doctrine, which they impose on the text by eisegesis rather than gain from the text through exegesis what it clearly and openly teaches in detail, since this verse doesn't say anything about Jesus being an incarnation of the person of the Father or a mode of the Father or any specific details of the oneness doctrine, right? Here then is the proof text in Scripture, John 8:58, before Abraham was, I am. Here's the false dilemma concluded from the proof text. Jesus could only be claiming to be the great I Am. And here's a scripture negating the false dilemma and conclusion. John 5:30, when Jesus said, I can of myself do nothing. And Exodus 3:14 actually said hoon, meaning the being, not ego eimi. And we'll look at many other scriptures in this study. So, if Jesus didn't explain the details of either the Trinity or the oneness in this passage, what did he mean? Shall we jump to conclusions or search the scriptures to find out? We've already seen what jumping to conclusions looks like, so now let's try searching the scriptures for clear verses for our understanding. Here's the first thing about John 8:58 that you need to know. Some people will tell you that Jesus was quoting Exodus 3:14. That passage goes like this. Moses said to God, behold, when I come to the children of Israel and tell them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What should I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, you shall tell the children of Israel this, I am has sent me to you. God said moreover to Moses, you shall tell the children of Israel this, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. The thing is, I am was written in Greek in the Septuagint, as was the New Testament, and the Greek Old Testament, which the apostles often used, did not use the same Greek words Jesus used in Exodus 3:14. The words I am in the New Testament come from the Greek words ego eimi, while Exodus 3:14 in the Greek Septuagint doesn't use ego eimi as God's name at all whatsoever. What it says in Greek is ego eimi hoon, which translated means I am the being. So in Exodus 3:14, what God said in the Greek translation version was, tell them the being has sent you, not tell them I am, ego eimi has sent you. So no, Jesus did not repeat what Yahweh said, and Jesus certainly didn't tell them, I am Yahweh. As can be seen in the passage in Exodus, God was very clear and very expressive of who he was. God's characteristic assertiveness and clarity in explaining himself in Exodus 3:14 is very unlike the proof text that incarnationists like Onesians use to attempt to prove Jesus' claim to be Yahweh. For a very pertinent contrast, consider God's clear and absolute declaration of himself to Moses above, as compared with Jesus' answer to Paul, asking basically the same question from Acts 9:5. Paul said, "Who are you, Lord?" The Lord said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise up and enter into the city, and you will be told what you must do." Notice that Jesus didn't say anything like, I am the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or anything like that which Yahweh said to Moses. And what was Paul's understanding of what Jesus proclaimed to him? Acts 9:20 says the Apostle Paul, immediately in the synagogues, he proclaimed that he is the Son of God. Oh, so Paul, after encountering Jesus for the first time after his resurrection, didn't run around preaching that Jesus was a dual-natured incarnation of Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Rather, Paul went out preaching that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, just like Peter. Perhaps this Son of God doctrine has some validity after all. Let's get back to what Jesus meant in saying, I am. It is critical to understand that when God said, I am that I am, he was declaring his absolute independence from any other power or authority. The technical word for this is aseity, meaning existence originating from and having no source other than itself. Yahweh alone was and is the top of the chain of existence and authority. He does all things by himself. Most of all, Yahweh is self-existent and self-reliant. This is explained in commentaries, which, by the way, point out that I am as a name is an assumption. This is from Ellicott's. He writes, quote, I am assumed as a name implies, 1, an existence different from all other existence. In other words, I am and there is none beside me, from Isaiah 45:6. And 2, an existence out of time with which time has nothing to do. And 4, an independent and unconditioned existence from which all other is derived and on which it is dependent. And then from Benson commentary, quote, I am the existing being. That is, I am he that enjoys an essential, independent, immutable, and necessary existence. He is the foundation of all being and perfection, and that from him all things have derived their existence, so that it is he alone that has life in himself, and no creature of whatever rank or order has so much as an existence of its own. For in him we live and move and have our being, unquote. With that idea of I am, meaning independent existence in mind, hear what Jesus says right here in John 5:19-20. Jesus therefore answered them, most assuredly I tell you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father doing. For whatever things he does, these the Son also does likewise. For the Father has affection for the Son and shows him all things that he himself does. He will show him greater works than these, that you may marvel. Then again, John 5:26-27. For as the Father has life in himself, even so he gave to the Son also to have life in himself. He also gave him authority to execute judgment because he is a Son of Man. And then John 5:30, I can of myself do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous because I don't seek my own will, but the will of my Father who sent me. Does that sound like Jesus was claiming independent existence of himself? Do any of these passages explain that Jesus is the second person of a trinity of co-equal persons of one substance? No. But neither do any of these explain that Jesus is a dual-natured incarnation of the Father, and he is only speaking from his human nature. They teach us something contrary to that. They teach the Son can do nothing of himself in John 5:19. They teach the Father gave to his Son to have life in himself in John 5:26. Therefore, the Father's life is inherent and independent, but the Son's life was not inherent, it being given to him, and thus also was dependent. They teach the Father gave to his Son authority. They teach Jesus received the power to take up his life again by commandment from the Father in John 10:18. Each one of these points have the exact opposite meaning from an independent being. And remember that Jesus cannot deny himself per 2 Timothy 2:13. In these passages, Jesus was explicitly talking about himself, not his human nature. So either Jesus lied in these explanations about himself, or he didn't mean what people jump to conclude about what he said in John 8:58. Thus, the imagination that Jesus was claiming to be Yahweh is an imagination that needs to be cast down per 2 Corinthians 10:5. What then did Jesus mean by saying before Abraham was, I am? First, he was making what is perhaps the greatest statement of faith ever made by a human. Faith is biblically defined as hope that is not seen, Romans 8:24. It is also defined as the assurance of things hoped for, proof of things not seen, in Hebrews 11:1. And see also 2 Corinthians 5:6-7, Romans 3:21-22, and Galatians 2:16. Our faith in God exists in contrast to any ability to see God, for we walk by faith, not by sight, per 2 Corinthians 5:7. So then, to be our example, Jesus also had to walk by faith, not by sight. The only way Jesus could walk by faith is to have had a human self-awareness that could not see God. These are things the Bible tells us positively about Jesus when it says he was made like us in all things. But it also tells us plainly that Jesus was faithful to God. This is from Hebrews 3:1-6. Therefore, holy brothers, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Jesus, who was faithful to him who appointed him, as also was Moses in all his house. God operates in an absolutely assured anticipation of what he foreknows. Since God is a moral being, his foreknowledge is part of being all good. Romans 4:17-18 from the New King James Version says, as it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. God calls those things which do not exist as though they did. This makes Christ's faithfulness to God a human reflection or image of God's foreknowledge. That is a critical aspect of Christ's faith. Christ had faith in God because God had a faith-like foreknowledge of Christ. So when Christ said, before Abraham was, I am, he was referring to his faith that he was the planned Messiah and Son of God in preeminence over Abraham's preeminence over Abraham's children. Which means that Jesus was simply telling them that before Abraham existed, he was God's foreknown Messiah. And that we can demonstrate by what the Bible explains. For that, we notice that the entire context for John 8:58 is centered around the Pharisees not believing Jesus is the Messiah. From John 7:40 to 8:58, Jesus is providing proof to the Pharisees that he is the Messiah. This discussion begins at John 7, verse 40. Many of the multitude, therefore, when they heard these words, said, this is truly the prophet. Others said, this is the Christ. But some said, what, does the Christ come out of Galilee? Hasn't the scripture said that the Christ comes of the seed of David and from Bethlehem, the village where David was? So there arose a division in the multitude because of him. This is the context, the basis of the whole discussion from John 7:40 to 8:58. In the entire event, Jesus never once said to the Jews that he is Yahweh. Jesus cannot deny himself, 2 Timothy 2:13. Now notice what he told them in John 8:28. Jesus therefore said to them, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am, and I do nothing of myself, but as my Father taught me, I say these things. Since I am means an independent and unconditioned existence, incarnationists want you to believe that Jesus said, I am an independent existence and I do nothing of myself. That would be a self-contradiction. Within 8 words stated by Jesus, I am and I do nothing of myself, incarnationists want you to believe Jesus himself was both claiming to be the great I am and denying that he was the independently existent great I am in the same sentence, at the same time, in the same relationship. That is nonsense. That is confusion. But that is what happens when the Bible is interpreted by jumping to conclusions the way the devil does and not considering the context in which Jesus was speaking. That, folks, is no less of a contradiction than saying God is three, but he is one at the same time in the same relationship as Trinitarians do. You cannot be A and not be A at the same time in the same relationship without there being a contradiction. Jesus cannot be independent, I am, and not be independent, I can do nothing of myself, at the same time. Notice carefully that he is talking about his self, I, not his human nature. And that is what Onesian folks need to hear if they want to hear Jesus. That human nature imagination comes from anti-Christian Gnosticism. There is nowhere in the Bible where Jesus or any other biblical writer teaches or explains that Jesus was referring to his human nature in relation to his deific nature, which is another imagination. What incarnationists, oneness, and Trinitarians want you to believe is that by interpreting John 8:58 the way the devil interprets God's words, you can arrive at truth, which they express in words of their own imagination, but not Scripture. And thus that truth, their truth, is not biblical truth. It is their imagination that is read into the passage and made to appear to be truth. And that is what eisegesis, jumping to conclusions and interpreting by false dilemma, looks like. Furthermore, I am simply means I am. Have you ever said, referring to yourself, I am? In addition to the above facts, the phrase I am is just as common of a phrase in Greek as it is in English. It is not God's name. For examples of this, see John 9:9, the blind man who said, I am, ego eimi. Peter said, I am, ego eimi, in Matthew 26:22. Judas said, I am, ego eimi, in Matthew 26:25. The angel Gabriel said, I am, ego eimi, in Luke 1:19. The first time Jesus used I am was to confirm to the Samaritan woman that he was indeed the Messiah. This is John 4:25-26. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah comes, he who is called Christ. When he has come, he will declare to us all things. Jesus said to her, I am the one who speaks to you. As we can see clearly, Jesus was simply declaring himself to be the Messiah in response to the woman who referred to the coming of Messiah in the previous verse. Note that he is in italics, meaning that it is added by the translators to make the Greek read properly in English. This means that it is a standard grammatical expression in Greek to not supply the pronoun. The referent is based on the context. In this case, it is the context of him affirming that he is the Messiah that was to come. Another very clear case where Jesus used I am, ego eimi, in the context of being the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God, is found in Mark 14:61-62. Again, the high priest asked him, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? Jesus said, I am, ego eimi. You will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of the sky. This, being the Messiah, is yet again the context that Jesus uses I am for, that he was the Christ, the Son of God. Likewise, in the case of John 8:24 and 58, by saying before Abraham was, I am, Jesus was simply telling the Jews that he was in God's foreknowledge, plan, and purpose for redeeming mankind before Abraham existed. Jesus never said or explained himself in a way to mean that he literally pre-existed as a conscious being in heaven before Abraham existed. Rather, when Jesus is allowed to explain himself, that imagination of men is totally refuted by the words of Jesus himself. The view that Jesus literally and consciously personally pre-existed conflicts with the Bible's explicit explanations of Jesus being himself born of Mary. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you will continue with the next video in the series. As usual, links will be posted below for previous and following videos as available, and God bless.